Welcome back to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. Following Ana Kasparian's latest investigation, we're taking a hard look at efforts to cut police funding in Los Angeles and how that may be backfiring, costing the city more money and putting public safety at risk. A new Real Clear Investigations report finds that after the LAPD's budget was slashed in the wake of the 2020 defund the police movement, overtime costs have surged to record highs. In 2024 alone, Los Angeles spent over $265 million on police overtime, $100 million more than in 2019. Some officers made more than $400,000, with one detective earning over $600,000. That's more than the mayor and the governor. Now, the reason for this: fewer boots on the ground. Since 2020, the LAPD has shrank by more than 2,000 personnel. And as staffing falls, the department leans harder on the remaining officers, many of whom are logging extensive hours. Instead of spending $1.71 billion for nearly 15,000 officers, they're spending more, spending $1.73 billion for 12,500. Now, this isn't just about budget. It's affecting real-world response times. Non-emergency calls now take 40 to 60 minutes, well beyond the target of 15 to 20 minutes. And even emergencies are stretching past the goal of the 7-minute response. There are still plans to further cut the force. City leaders are trying to fill the gap with new unarmed response teams for mental health calls, but those workers say that they often still need police backup when situations turn volatile. Meanwhile, large events like the 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Olympics are expected to drive overtime costs even higher, raising new questions about the long-term consequences of the shrinking police force. We're joined now by the lead investigator on the story, Ana Kasparian. Ana, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.
So the city's policies seem to have completely backfired in all ways. Attempts to defund have seen higher costs, people are dealing with worse response times, and then officers are getting burnt out despite making insane salaries. So how did we get here, and what needs to be done?
Well, to really understand the current moment, I kind of want to take us back to give the audience some context about how Los Angeles differs from other big cities across the country. So Los Angeles, even historically, prior to 2020, prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, just really did have a much smaller Los Angeles Police Department. The number of sworn officers really lagged behind other major cities. In some cases, about half the amount of sworn officers that you would find in Washington, D.C., for instance, per capita, meaning per 100,000 residents. Now, in around, I believe it was 2014, then Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa decided to push for additional funding for the LAPD so they can increase their ranks to 10,000 sworn officers, which the force or the police department argued was the force necessary, the numbers necessary in order to, efficiently and sufficiently respond to 911 calls and keep the community safe. And LA is a massive city, millions of people. So 10,000 seemed like a reasonable number. Now, fast forward to what happened in 2020. You have all of this unrest across the country, spurred by the fact that George Floyd was killed by a Minneapolis police officer on camera. And that led to calls to defund the police. Now, Los Angeles, of course, is one of the bluest cities in the bluest state. So it's unsurprising that the Los Angeles City Council at the time did move to cut the LAPD budget to the tune of about $150 million. And the whole idea was we're going to take that money and instead divert it to social workers, to unarmed response teams, things like that, to kind of reimagine policing. But what actually ended up happening is some of those investments didn't really end up being as effective as the advocates argued. And at the same time, we lost police officers, sworn officers, due to the elimination of some positions, in addition to an influx of sworn officers deciding they're going to retire early because being a cop was now essentially making one a pariah in the local community. The other issue was the fact that you had city council members and candidates running for the city council focusing on the need to cut more from the police budget. So this unwelcoming environment led to early resignations or retirements, additional resignations, and also the elimination of some positions for sworn officers. Now, you can eliminate the police force, but you're not going to be able to eliminate the need for a police force. So in 2021, we really did experience this significant crime spike in LA. It wasn't unique to LA. This crime spike was similar to what was witnessed in other parts of the country that year. So the need for sworn officers increased at a time when the number of sworn officers decreased. And so the city really had no choice but to start spending big on overtime pay. And year after year, the situation has gotten a lot worse, and it's become incredibly difficult to recruit individuals who want to be police officers in LA.
So compared to other major cities, LA seems like they are getting it wrong, but are others who also went big with defund the police, are they similarly looking at this same result? Are they also at a point where they're like, oh, we thought this was going to save money, we thought this was going to do this, and in fact, it's doing the opposite of all those things?
Absolutely. I think another good example of this trend playing out is in Oakland, California. I'm sure that if you do some digging, you'll notice a similar trend in other big cities that aren't even in California, right? But this notion that you can just, eliminate positions within a police department and that will somehow save money, it hasn't really come to fruition because of the fact that there's a reason why those positions exist. And as much as I hate to admit it, crime is real. There is a decrease in crime in more recent years, and I'm happy to see that. But now there's also increased unrest as a result of protests, demonstrations, sometimes some that devolve into riots and things like that, that require more police presence. And this is happening, of course, in response to some of Donald Trump's immigration policies. That's certainly been a situation here in Los Angeles. And so the Los Angeles City Council literally just voted to take out a $5 million loan. And we're dealing with a lot of fiscal issues here in LA, but they took out a $5 million loan in order to be able to cover police overtime just during these protests. And they've already racked up over $17 million in overtime charges just from these protests alone. So this has been very costly for the city, not only because of the unrest, but we've really compounded a bad situation by eliminating positions within the police department, making this city so unfriendly for individuals who want to be cops. And so the cops are overwhelmed, overworked, but they're making a pretty penny in overtime.
Yeah, I saw in your reporting up to $600,000. That's money that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. So obviously they're putting in the hours that then equates to that, but it also is just like if they didn't do these policies to begin with, these people would have been making more closely resembling normal salaries, and then it wouldn't be costing LA so much. So
sorry, I have to add one other thing, because what's so frustrating about this situation is when you have police officers should be working overtime. They just should. Considering the fact that they're interacting with our community. You want them to be well rested. You want to ensure they're in the right frame of mind in order to carry out their duties effectively. And what ends up happening when you have these cops that are overworked is they are more likely to make mistakes. They're more likely to have hostile interactions with the public. And that sows additional distrust toward the police force and provides fodder for the activists who would literally want to eliminate the police force entirely and replace them with these unarmed response teams, which quite frankly have been ineffective in a lot of instances. They might be good to respond to some nonviolent calls, but oftentimes they will respond to what they believe is a nonviolent call, maybe someone having some sort of mental health episode, but that individual is acting so erratically and might be armed with a knife or something like that. And the social worker or the individual within this response team doesn't feel safe and has no choice but to call a police officer for backup anyway. So it's really been a mess, and it takes politicians who lack the type of ego our politicians have to actually recalibrate and make important and difficult decisions.
That was my follow up. It feels like these crisis teams haven't really been set up to succeed. They're seeming to be more in a stopgap type role, and they're looking to them to solve all these major problems that LA and places around the country are facing. And I don't think that they're given the resources or the ability to really do their jobs.
I agree with you entirely on that. I mean, I'll give you one specific example that I encountered, and actually it was captured on video that went viral a few years ago. This was in West Hollywood, California, and the sheriff's department had effectively been cut in half, I believe, if I'm remembering the numbers, but don't quote me on that. But there was a divestment in regard to the LA Sheriff's Department operating in West Hollywood, and they were replaced with these unarmed response teams. And there was this road rage incident on Santa Monica Boulevard in which like these two dudes are at blows. Like they're punching each other, they're hitting each other. And in the background, you can literally see members of this unarmed response team, and they're doing nothing. They're doing nothing because they don't want to intervene in any type of violent incident, even if, you know, there's no indication that either individual who's scrapping at that moment is armed. So if we're talking about social workers and mental health professionals who can respond to a situation and they're accompanied by a police officer in case something becomes violent or erratic, I'm actually all for that. I think that's a smart reform that should be, you know, I guess included in the police department, right? I don't want social workers to be a separate thing. I think we should have mental health professionals working with police within the department. But guess what that takes? That takes more investment. Smart policing takes more investment. This ridiculous, like, let's just get rid of them attitude, this maximalist attitude has really been detrimental to cities like LA, to cities like Oakland, but more importantly, detrimental to the very communities, okay, that BLM purports to want to serve. Okay, majority Black neighborhoods, neighborhoods that are lower on the socioeconomic ladder, neighborhoods that are vulnerable to more violence. Those are the people who are now dealing with insult to injury due to the divestment in the police department, but additionally to this anti-police culture that continues to fester within our LA City Council.
No, it seems like it requires a level of collaboration that no one seems really willing to go across lines or go against what they feel is 100% the best in order to make happen. So obviously it's what we think should happen, but who knows if it will actually happen. I do kind of want to take a moment to look towards the future. Obviously, with the World Cup, with the Olympics on the horizon, is LA going to be able to staff up safely and affordably? Are we going to see these big world events coming to fruition and then LA being like, oh my God, we need to pull from other places because we just do not have the resources to be able to staff this?
I mean, it remains to be seen how Los Angeles plans to pay for it, to have the, you know, the abundance of law enforcement necessary to hold those types of major, I mean, we're talking about global events, right? We're talking about the World Cup. We're talking about the Summer Olympics. You really do need some significant investments. And, you know, one of the things that Karen Bass wanted to, and that's our mayor, Karen Bass in Los Angeles, one of the things she wanted to implement was a car-free Olympics, essentially bolstering our public transportation to the point where people won't even need to get in a car and drive anywhere. In order to understand how absurd that is, you have to understand the geography of Los Angeles. It is a giant, sprawling city, and you're going to have some summer events here in the San Fernando Valley, where I'm at. You're going to have summer events, you know, in downtown LA. So it kind of remains to be seen how we're going to have the money and honestly, the deregulation as it pertains to codes, building codes and things like that in time to build the infrastructure to do what Karen Bass envisions the city is going to do for the World Cup and the Summer Olympics. We're going to have to wait and see. I'm skeptical, but I would love to be proven wrong. I just want to really emphasize the fact I was born in LA. I've been in LA my entire life. I love this city so much. And so when I see it start to fall apart as a result of egotistical politicians who do these experimental policies, realize that they're failing, but decide to double down, it makes me want to rip my hair out. So I don't love speaking poorly of my city. I think that this city is full of really wonderful people. It's a diverse city, and I think that diversity makes this city strong. I think the downfall of this city in recent years is the result of poor leadership and politicians who are really activists more than anything. You know, they come from the activist class and there's gung ho about very specific policies and will continue to provide cover for those policies even when they're failing.
I mean, obviously, I know that you are from LA and you've lived there, but to your credit, I think the investigations that you've been putting out are really interesting, and they provide some much needed insight into the goings on. So I know that sometimes they may come across as negative, but you're doing a fantastic job. Is there anything that you'd like to leave people with?
Well, the final thing I'll say is, in LA, we just had a $1 billion budget deficit. And we are one of the highest tax cities and one of the highest tax states. We should not be dealing with a budget deficit. It's absolutely absurd, but we are. And it's due to waste, I believe, fraud, especially as it pertains to some of the funding that's been allocated to NGOs and nonprofits for homeless assistance. I don't think that money is actually going where it was meant to go. And so when you have a situation in which the city overall spent $1.1 billion in overtime pay for all public workers in the city, obviously something isn't adding up. And these understaffed government agencies need to be staffed. It's mostly the police department, but there are other government agencies where people are pulling in a lot of money in overtime because they are not sufficiently staffed. So the city needs to be real. I feel like none of them are actually looking at the math here and realizing how disastrous it is. But the people who end up suffering in the end are their very constituents. And I hope their constituents wake up to that, because as they see city services get cut as a result of these exorbitant, overtime costs, they need to ask questions of their local politicians and, maybe reconsider whether we are making the right decision when it comes to leadership of the city.
Definitely. Well, Anna, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Maggie.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.